أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم رضي الله تعالى عنه وسرد التابعين وعلماء أملين وآئمة أربع مجتهدين ومخالديهم أما بعد ومخالديهم إلى يوم الدين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, this was a class that I actually had prepared for my family and my immediate family, and also my Jamaat as well. And um, a little bit of this conversation that we'll discuss today, some of it the listeners should be able to identify with it. Most of it, the people within our community should be on board because we are to be following the same uh, methodology, which is the methodology of Sheikh Uthman bin Fodio, Tawadumullah Ibrahimati Amin, which is founded upon the Kitab or Sunnah, and it was a methodology of Tajdid, a methodology of revival, where it changed and affected a whole society. But they didn't do it as one individual, but they did it as a jama'ah. You know, families involved. It wasn't just individuals. Most of modern Islamic movements are individually inclined. So this is why we're mentioning that. The text that we're going to be using is centered. The lessons that we're going to go over is centered around a text by Sheikh Abdullahi bin Fodio, Tagadamullah Ibrahimati Amin, who was the brother of Sheikh Uthman bin Fodio. And the name of the text is called At-Tibyaan li Haquq Ikhwan, right? And it's about the Tibyaan, the lesson or explanation, of the rights of brotherhood. And we'll be discussing that. And then within it, it's composed of 4 chapters and a khatam and a conclusion. Inshallah. So we won't delay it any further. We'll get right to it, inshallah, because we want to try to be as brief as possible. But I kind of like been working on it most of the day today. So what I'm gonna read from you is the notes from the introduction, and we want to talk about tajdid and rectification, or reviving the deen or reviving the family. Because if you look to observe now, within our immediate city and within our circle, Islam is taking a decline. Right? How is that? There's a more leaning of people inclining towards fornication and adultery, more now than other times. That's one. The broken families where people are more inclined to get in divorce. The other inclinations are people deciding that there's no need to get married, right? So all of these things. So if the rectification of Islam in your dunyawi affairs, it will only be rectified by holding and unifying based upon ijtima, right? Collective cohesiveness, coming together as a jama'ah, right? So, these, in order to rectify, because when people come together, that also gives the onlookers an example to look at. And most people will say, well, the best example is the Prophet Sallallahu. But when you're displaying that character, you're giving life to his sunnah. As the Prophet Sallallahu said, about giving life to his sunnah and will be raised up in Jannah with him and will be like this, as the hadith mentions. So anyway, so know that the decay or the decline of both your deen and your dunya, your worldly affairs, is a result of corruption, and it's also a result of being divided up in disunity, right? So a lot of times that you have, and you have to remember that we are suffering from a traumatizing time and a traumatizing event, which was once called the transatlantic slave trade, where it was breeded into us enmity and hatred. And example of this enmity and hatred, you won't have an animosity or hatred to a person or a people or a group or whatever the case is that oppresses you, but you will have more of a stronger animosity and hatred of those who are from the same background as you, same family as you, right? Sometimes this goes on in the family with brothers and sisters, husband and wife, aunt and uncle, right? They'll have hatred, animosity towards each other, have a hatred where they can't stand each other, right? And as a result of that hatred, the entire family unit suffers. Like if you have a mother and a father that hate each other, whether they're together or divorced, right? The children suffers at it. Why? Because they're constantly at battle with one another, and they're constantly frequently working to undermine each other and destroy each other. So therefore, your spiritual strength as a jama'ah, as a community, as a family, as a family, as a community, your spiritual strength weakens. Because there's no way that you can be a person of wilayah, of a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, while you have animosity and hatred towards another servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when Allah ta'ala talks about his servant and his connection. If he's a servant that takes care of his obligations, Allah loves him. If he's a servant that not only he take care of his obligation, not only does he take care of his obligations, but also that he does what? That he takes care of the nafil action, those things that are sunnah, he takes care of those. And very particular about that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves that person. And so when that person loves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Allah ta'ala loves that person, Allah ta'ala becomes his protector. He wouldn't put himself in a place that would gain the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He wouldn't put himself in a fight that Allah wouldn't back him up in that fight, right? And so imagine that this type of person is that person you have an animosity and hatred towards. This is the general friendship and connection that every person under the kalima, under the statement of shahada of la ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, they naturally possess this, right? They naturally possess this if they're taking care of their obligations and then they're increasing in their nafil actions, right? This is important. You find this as being very important. That relationship with Allah Ta'ala, then Allah Ta'ala will cause creation to love you as well, right? So can you imagine that you're having an animosity and a hatred towards that individual? And these hatred are being promoted today by non-Muslims and Muslims alike. All you have to do is listen to a lot of the rhetoric that is being screamed out on your social media platforms, all through your internet. The worst type of women is this, or a man is this, and a man don't deserve this, and a woman don't deserve that, and etc., where our Prophet ﷺ, he spoke differently of the believers. He gave us a different example. So that's your spiritual strength begins to decline. But not only do your spiritual strength declines, your political strength declines as well, that you don't have as much political power that you think you have. You don't have that type of clout. And then Allah Ta'ala will allow your enemies to feast over you and humiliate you, right? Make mockery of you, make mockery of your lifestyle, make mockery of your deen, right? This is also, problematic when we, as the Muslims, are disenfranchised, disunified all over the place, right? So then what happens after that? Then your economic strengths fall into decay, right? You won't be economically strong. You have to remember, with solid jama'ah, solid families, right? Allah put barakah in the wealth, and you'll have those things that are necessary for you to have. I didn't say you'll be filthy rich, but you'll have your necessities in life, right? Then Allah Ta'ala puts barakah in it. Think about it. A lot of people today, this is barakah. Barakah is a thing that could, where it contributes an increase. Okay? You get an increase. You take a person that's poor, and a lot of people do this, and this is how we squander our wealth. They're in need of wealth, they're in need of money, and they take, on an average, maybe weekly or every couple days, they'll take their last $50 and spend it on FanDuel, lottery, scratch-offs, right? And they believe that there's a chance for them. There's no guarantee, but there's a chance for them to win more money. And they begin to pray and hope that they get this particular money. This is a way to destroy the barakah, the blessings in anything that you do. Take that same person, take that same $50, and this person has taqwa and iman, that they don't try to do anything, because gambling is haram. So they don't try to do anything haram in order to gain money, in order to increase, to get extra things. But rather yet, where they see the barakah at, where the beginning of the barakah for them begins at, it begins at them taking that $50, holding it in their pocket, right? And they're praying and making dua that Allah Ta'ala gives them, the sustenance that they need in order to increase their wealth, right? And they remain steadfast, because you have to remember, as they're doing this, they're keeping in mind what Allah Ta'ala says, where He says in the Quran that every difficulty that a person has, He'll give them relief from that difficulty. Every difficulty that person has, there will indeed there'll be relief from that difficulty. And so then in the midst of this, he also remembers that what Allah Ta'ala tells us in the Quran, that if you fear Allah, Allah will give you the ability to make way out of every problem that you have, right? And so they're patient. They don't turn to drugs. They don't turn to gambling or anything haram in order to increase. And then Allah Ta'ala gives them the ability to come up with an idea, right? Either one, to come up with an idea in order to figure out their way and get out of that jam. And some might say that's being motivated by shaitan. Well, how you don't figure that FanDuel or the lottery isn't a way that Allah Ta'ala is giving me to get, right? Although you may receive money when you win, but you incur sin, and there's no barakah in your wealth, and and getting that wealth will almost be like you don't have no wealth at all. You know how many horror stories you'll hear about a person, oh, he won $10 million. And, matter of fact, one of my coworkers was just talking about this. A man had won, he was a garbage man, a sanitation worker. He won a lottery for probably $11 million. He blew all $11 million, but I'm sorry, it wasn't $11 million. It was about $500,000. He blew all that money and just went back to work like life was regular. Most people are like, oh man, I will invest in this and do this and make sure the wealth grow here. And eventually my plan is to stop working. Well, that barakah is not there. And so then as fast as that money comes, is as fast as it goes, right? So this is also a decline in your economic strength, right? And when there's no ijtima, no collectiveness as a group, then therefore spiritually you'll be hurting. Because why? What does your spirituality in Jama'ah coming together have to do with one another, how many blessings does a person get for praying in the Jama'ah 5 times a day? As I recall, the Prophet ﷺ said 27 to 25, right? What else happens in the midst of you going to do ijtimad, to come together as a Jama'ah? What else happens? You won't be in those prayer ranks, so your hearts won't bind together, right? Isn't that why the Prophet ﷺ told us to straighten our roles, to line up shoulder to shoulder, foot to foot, right? So that we can bond together and don't leave any gaps, because the shaitan enters in between the gaps, right? As you're walking or driving to the masjid and you're in wudu, the angels, the malaika, the angels will make dua for you while you're en route on your way to the masjid, right? While you're in a halakah, while you're in a gathering, a circle of knowledge, the angels are making dua for you. You know, in some hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said that all of creation is making dua for you, even the animals that are in the sea, right? So when there's no ijtimad, when there's a nothing but firqa, the division, that barakah leaves for the one who breaks from the Jama'ah, right? The barakah leaves that one who breaks from the Jama'ah. We should, after our shahada and learning and taking care of our obligations and being consistent in those things, we should be looking for behaviors and actions that will get us what? Hasanat. That'll get us good deeds. That will increase us in good deeds. So, but anyway, and so when the Jama'ah is in, division and disunity, you lose out on your spiritual ground, right? You lose out on your political realm, and you also lose out on your economic realm. And those people who are isolated and break away from the Jama'ah, this is why they have such a hard time, with staying consistent with regards to matters of the deen. You'll find inconsistency in them within prayer. You'll find them inconsistency with them in mood swings. One moment they're high up, their iman is high, and then next minute their iman's low. And we're not talking about they're not as strong as yesterday, but we're talking about almost to the point where they're not even praying, right? You remind them about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they become angry, right? These type of things, because of what? Because of ijtimad. But when you're constantly around like-minded believers and y'all are on the same accord, then therefore in your weakest moment, you'll find some benefit, and that person will uplift you. You never know that time where you gather together with ijtimad. And look how Allah Ta'ala has placed it. If you look at just the 5 pillars alone, right? It requires a certain level of ijtimad, right? When people usually in our practice, when I'm saying our tradition, because it's not that you have to necessarily make it and go to the masjid in order for the shahada, to give the shahada in front of people, but it's given in front of people so people will know that you're Muslim. So now that you get to meet your new brothers and sisters in Islam, right? So that's one, because that's the first pillar, right? Is shahada. The second thing is what? Salah. Salat isn't necessarily meant for you to pray by yourself. Even women, right? Although they pray majority of their time at home and they spend their time at home, but I don't know who I'm fooling. It's 2023. Women be outdoors more than men now. They outside, right? So, but the idea is that they're, tended to family and making things straight in the home. That even then they're still encouraged. They're encouraged, and the men are encouraged, I should say, not to sway them and block them from going to the masjid, right? So there's some benefit in them leaving a home to come to gain knowledge that's beneficial. But when you go outside where there's no things, where there's no barakah, then you get caught up in the things that are of no benefit to you, right? So anyway, so all of these things that you get together. Oh, wait, let me go back. Ramadan, even though you're fasting by yourself personally, but what happens? You come together for Taraweeh. You come together for iftar, right? You come together for these particular things, right? You come together for the Eid, right? So these things, although they're individual action, it has some element of ijtimad involved in it, coming together with some togetherness, right? Next thing is what? Zakat. Even though it's an individual thing, But you pay it. When you pay it, you give it to the Amir, and the Amir distributes it to those people that are in need. So there's still a certain level of ijtima. You wouldn't know who's in need if they're not coming together, right? So this is how you have to look at it and see for what it is. This is how you gain ijtima. This is how you gain benefit from it. And Hajj, there's no reason to even talk about ijtima with regards to Hajj, because how many millions of people are making Hajj, what they're about to be doing within the next couple of weeks, right? Hajj. So Islam is perpetuated and is centered around ijtima. That is deen. And with that deen, it's a way of life. And so within that way of life, there is what? You have within that way of life, you have what? You learn your behavior, your etiquette, how to be brothers to one another, how to be children to parents, and how parents should be to children, right? These things are of necessity and benefit, and it come with much barakah, because all of these things that you're doing, the benefit, it all benefits your akhirah, your afterlife. Because remember, the very center around everything is about building our yaqeen, building our certainty, building our iman, in order to do what? In order to increase and to make sure that the wazn of a'mal, the scales of action, where your deeds are being weighed and recorded, or the kutub, right? The scrolls that you'll receive on the Qiyamah, that the writing of it should be more so on the right side versus the left. If it's on the right side, then that's an indication of paradise, right? On the left side, then it's more of an indication of hellfire, right? And may Allah Ta'ala protect us all from that. Ameen. Now, so it gives you the benefit in the within the deen, within the deen and in the dunya as well, right? The deen and the dunya, meaning both, get a combination by you having strength. Allah Ta'ala will strengthen you politically. You'll gain the protection of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, right? Allah Ta'ala will put barakah in your wealth, in your economic situation. Allah will bless you. Think about it. There's a hadith that's mentioned in the Musnad of Imam Ahmed about a man who has a recalcitrant, rebellious wife, and she's earned up to the point of basically that the man should leave her. She's that wretched. It makes it hard and difficult for him to gain his sustenance the longer that he keeps. When I'm talking about somebody that is obviously recalcitrant, obviously rebellious, there's times. What's another proof of this? Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. He came to visit his son, Ismail. And he came through, and he went to visit. Ismail wasn't home. And he asked his wife that answered the door. She invited him in. He asked her, how are things? She started complaining. Oh, we don't ever have enough. No, we don't never have enough food. All he do is go out and seek. Well, da. And, after the visit, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam left a message for him. He didn't even tell who he was specifically. He told her to tell Ismail that he should change his gate, change his threshold, change his gate. He left. Ismail came back. He asked, anything different happened today? Anybody come by? She said, yes, this old man came by. He chatted with me for a little bit. He asked about our conditions, and he left me a message to tell you to change your threshold, change your gate. He came back some time later. This is in the same narration. He came back some time later, knocked on the door. Woman answered the door. He came in. She invited him in. He talked to her. He asked for Prophet Ismail alayhi salam. He asked how are things. She said, oh, it's the best. We make do with what we got. Allah has blessed us, etc., etc. And he waited some time for Ismail to return. He didn't return. And just like the first time, he left, and he said he left a message behind. He told Ismail to keep his gate, maintain his gate. And so Ismail returns back from, being, out working and seeking out his sustenance. And he asks his wife, what things, how were things, did anybody come visit me or anything of this nature? She said, yes, old man, he came to visit you. And, he stayed for a minute, he talked, and he said to keep your gate, maintain this gate. And so then what was explained by the Prophet ﷺ, that the old man was Prophet Ibrahim. Ismail was his son. When he came the first time, when he came back the second time, he didn't have the same wife. He had a different wife, and there was more barakah in that particular family. Now, and I understand in today's society, when you turn on the television, the social media, and the television and things, and we make verbiage out of it, slang and things, and say we have toxic traits and toxic relationships and things of that nature. If we were dealing with the men of the past or the women of the past, none of us would be married. Matter of fact, most of us will probably be deemed to be hypocrites and be enemies of Islam because the way that we conduct ourselves in our thinking, right? So anyway, Abu Hurairah reported that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, لا تدخلون جنة حتى تؤمنوا ولا تؤمنوا حتى تحبوا ولا أدلكم على شيء إذا فعلتموه تحببتم أفشوا السلام عليكم السلام بينكم. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was reported to have said, he was reported to have said, you will not enter Jannah, right? Hatta tu'minu, until you believe, you have certainty, you believe with certainty, right? So you won't enter Jannah until you believe with certainty. And you won't find this certainty وَلَا تُؤْمِنُوا حَتَّى تَحَبُّوا, until you love each other, right? So think about this. This isn't just talking about the brothers in the Jama'ah and the sisters in the Jama'ah, but it's also referring to the families as well. The husband should love the wife, the brothers should love the other brother, the sister should love the sister. And if you're in the case of polygyny, you shouldn't, come up with divisive lines to divide the children up and things of that nature. The love has to be reflective in both ways. You have to love each other, right? And the Prophet ﷺ said, you won't begin until you love each other. And he said, I'll teach you something or show you something that if you did, you will love each other, right? So this is something that's important. And what did the Prophet ﷺ say? He said that is afshiru salamu bainakum, that you spread the salams between each other. Families will not salam each other because we become over familiar with each other and we think that it's a formal greeting, and that's how we're taught, that you salam other Muslims, but when you're in the home, you don't have to give the salams. No, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, as-salamu qablu kalam, right? That the salams is before the speech. Usually you can get an indication of the type, what type time a person is on based on the type of salams they give you. When someone wants to give you do harm to you, they usually it's kind of cold. There's no emotion behind the salams, right? You agitated with your children or your wife, and you get a salams, assalamu alaikum, wa alaikum salam. You already know there's an indication already right there, right? So this is number one. This is one way of putting love between one another and making ijtima, ijtima. You can't nurse hatred and animosity in a family, even within co-wives, even within sisters, even within brothers, even, you can't nurse animosity and expect Allah Ta'ala to bless you, right? Matter of fact, nursing animosity and promoting hatred was one of the characteristics of the munafiqeen. The munafiqs, their sole purpose in life was to break up the jama'ah, to break up family. What does the Prophet ﷺ say about the shaitan. When the shayateen, they check in, the little shayateen, they check in, the little shaitans check in with big shaitan. And what is he? What does the Prophet say about the one who breaks up the family? Ah, you done good. He rewards him with a crown. Right? So know for certain, family, jama'ah, all of that is really one and the same. But shaitan wants to isolate you and break you apart. He loves it when you're apart, when you're not together. That's more so of the concern. That's more so where he's at with it. He wants you to be separate, right? I'm just trying to keep track of time. Now, so human beings, that's a sign of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well, right? When you have love between each other, that is a sign of mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm not talking about the type of love where she hitting you over the head with a club, out committing felonies and things of that nature, baseball bat in your car, keying up your car, or him breaking your windows, threatening your next husband. That's not love. That's insanity. That's an infatuation. Because the Muslim is always governed by the laws of the Sharia, right? And what does the Sharia teach you? Don't be a destructive person. Don't destroy people's property and things of that nature. And we're going to touch on these particular things, right? So the Sharia does not promote chaos, doesn't promote animosity, but rather yet it promotes love and the mercy and affection for one another. And you're constantly looking for that mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala based on the love and the rahmah where believers are connected. And you can see it from a family perspective when you look at the wife and the husband, right? When you look at the wife and the husband, sometimes people are together and they have hatred for one another, but they stand with each other. They may be staying together because he doesn't want his child support payments to go up, right? Or he doesn't want to be put on child support or things of this nature. And then he has the animosity and the hatred towards it. If the thing is going to disrupt you from being in obedience to Allah Ta'ala, you have to begin to trust Allah at some point and trust that Allah Ta'ala will aid you in your affair. Right? Now, so anyway, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, He says in the Quran, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. Right? So brothers, we have to see that having the ability to be married is one of the mercies from Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, is He created for us a spouse. And women, they're likewise the same, especially if you get married, right? Don't just look at yourself as being a blessing to him, but also look at him as being a blessing to you, right? Because I'm telling you, nothing is as lonely as not being married, right? Don't let people fool you, right? With this, how they promote being single and unmarried. Don't let people fool you into thinking and con you into thinking that that's the life, because many of them, they cry and they wish that they had someone to love them. So instead of that, right, they just raise hell on the internet all night long. Animosity, getting caught up in scandals, got enticing men to be in their inbox, and then they be like, sis, tell your husband to stay out my inbox, and so on and so forth. All of this stuff, why? Is because they're miserable, right? A lot of the animosity that Shaitan has against you is because he's miserable. When you have bad behavior towards your spouse, whether that's the husband towards the wife towards the husband, and you refuse to, humble yourself and correct it, stop it, and apologize for it, etc., and you want to keep it going, and you think that this is how the person's supposed to be treated, then therefore know for certainty that either one, you're not making a stinja properly, because that keeps the devil with you all the time, or two, you're possibly insane, because that keeps the devil with you all the time. That whisper is always going. So Allah Ta'ala, He says that the spouse is created for you as wajin, right? Li taskunu ilayha, and to live with them in tranquility, in kindness, and having a peace of mind. That's not saying that you won't get into an argument. Y'all won't have differences, right? Li taskunu ilayha wa ja'alna bayna mawadda wa rahma. But Allah Ta'ala, instead, you find in between y'all love and mercy, or affection and mercy. That's what you'll find, right? There's nothing wrong with the man, buying his wife a gift out of love, right? That's actually one of the best times. When you have your wife, she's studying hard, she's memorizing At-Tibyaan, she done memorized the Akhdari and did her Arabic, work and things of that nature. And the child, that child has memorized the Quran, and sometimes gifting with a reward encourages them to keep going, right? But you have to keep correcting the intentions, that you have to make sure that your intentions is to do this fi sabilillah, but you see the gift is part of Allah's barakah. But if you don't get it, you're still going to continue to do this thing, because ultimately Jannah is the goal, right? So anyway, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says in closing this ayah, he says, Inna fi dhalika li ayatin li qawmin yatafakkarun. And indeed, these are signs for people who reflect. While having mutual enmity towards each other, it's a causative factor of misery and destruction. How many families keep breaking into splinters? How many Jama'ats break into one group, from one group to the next group, from one masjid into two other masjids, and they both claim to be on the same methodology. They don't show any support towards each other, but rather, what they do is they whisper behind each other's backs, talk about this person, that person, and then by the time they're done talking about everyone in the circle, then they go after leadership, and then they convince each other, after they just ain't get along and they don't finish stabbing each other in the back, then they get together and say, we need new leadership. And then when the new leadership comes, they hoorah, hooray, and then what do? They start backbiting, go behind each other's back, and cause more dissension. You'll even find that in family. Sometimes you'll find that when you have miserable parents. You have miserable parents, and they whisper venom of separation and destruction into the hearts and the minds of the children. And then they don't leave that child alone until that child has destroyed their family, broke up their family with the husband. Now he no longer has a wife, and he's back to catering to his Umi or his Abi, and vice versa, right? Instead of encouraging them and praying for them, making dua for them, because this is also a sign of people of mercy, is that they pray for one another as well. And you pray for your children, you pray for their success, always pray that they be better than you, right? But sometimes our animosity, and like I said, you either got to be not making a stinger, right? Or you're mentally ill because you're constantly going towards sin nonstop, or you're intoxicated, because these things are used as weapons for shaitan, right? They're weapons for shaitan. Shaitan, he the jinn, they feed off of najas, right? Why do you think that you have to make dua when you go into the bathroom? You're saying, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-khubdi wa khaba'ith. You're seeking refuge. Oh Allah. You ain't just starting off saying a'udhu bika, right? You're saying Allahumma. You calling on Allah Ta'ala by all of his names. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika. Indeed, I seek refuge with you. Min al-khubdi wa khaba'ith, from the filthy jinn, the male jinn, and the filthy female jinn. And think about it. In the bathroom is so destructive. When you come out, what's the dua you say when you come out the bathroom? Gafranaka, forgive me. Let me forgive you. You forgive us, right? So that's how destructive it is. So sometimes most of us, we ain't properly cleaning ourselves. We don't care about tahara. We got urine splashing all over us. People wiping from the back to the front and so on and so forth. Just chaos. And they just can't think straight, right? So, but anyway, when the family is destroyed, when there's no longer mercy between them and no more love is between them, right? That's when people don't care no more. People don't care. You can be on your deathbed. I don't care. You ever hear the phrase, you have to really hate a person when you say, what's the new thing that youngins say when they say RIP to their enemy, rest in piss? Right? Or somebody will say to you, I wouldn't even give him a cup of urine to put if he was on fire, right? There has to be some serious animosity there. That mercy is left, that love is left. And that's the first thing. There has to be love between people, and for the effort of there to be tajdid, for there to be an effort of revival and calling people back to the Sunnah. Because I don't care how smart you are, if you harbor and have animosity towards believers, although you can mask it up and blame the person that, oh, you have deviancy in your belief or deviancy in your practice, right? You can cover it up that way. But that mutual hatred and animosity, you spew it out, and it goes into your ranks. It filters out until you create enemies, either within the ranks or outside of the ranks, or both, right? You create enemies. You create enemies for yourself, right? So these are the type of things that happen. And then what happens, this person, you ever met a person that just can't get along with nobody? They just hate everything about everybody. You know how many times I hear that? You know, Imam, I would come to the masjid more, but you know, I don't do fitna, and it's always fitna with the sisters, and I don't do fitna because it's fitna with the brothers all the time, and things of that nature. If you come, these are excuses to keep you away from khair, to keep you away from good, right? If there was benefit in staying away, don't you think that Allah Ta'ala would have told us that? Don't you think that that's the case? As Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, He mentions in the Quran, وَلَا شَاءَ رَبُّكَ لَا جَعَلَ النَّاسَ أُمَّةً وَاحِدًا وَلَا يَزَالُونَ مُخْتَلِفِينَ. If your Lord had willed for you all, He could have made us one ummah, one nation. But He's telling you about your nature, you still wouldn't stop to differ and disagree, right? And I know sometimes people promote that idea, you know, it's cool to be difficult, it's cool to challenge things, but this isn't necessarily the truth. The only time that you're obligated and make it an obligation and is praiseworthy is when you're challenging something that is kufr or something that goes against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And then in the very next ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, إِلَّا مَنْ رَحِمَ رَبُّكَ, right? So He could have made everyone one ummah, one community, but you still wouldn't cease to differ from one another. إِلَّا مَنْ رَحِمَ رَبُّكَ, right? Except him who your Lord has placed upon him His mercy, right? So we have to understand that people will be at odds with each other. So you don't have this false idea about, perfectionists never having a disagreement. This is not the case. But when there's not disagreement, you recognize that it is a mercy from your Lord. And this also leads to the other thing, which I was saying, there's no good in division and being divided, right? Because Allah Ta'ala, He says in the Quran, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, right? Allah Ta'ala, He says in the beginning of this ayat, He says, hold on to the rope of Allah, right? Meaning the Quran, meaning the Jama'ah, right? That thing which unifies the Jama'ah is the Quran, right? Then He says, وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, and don't divide amongst each other. Don't split up. But we, as Muslims, the masjid is supposed to be the epicenter of a spiritual healing and strengthening of one iman. But we come in, we'll pray, and then we start talking about how we can't be around other people. You see? How we can't be around others. I don't do because they got fitna. I don't do this because of this. But then we got more chaos and fitna within our homes. And sometimes, as we claim while we stay away, our homes and households are the reason why they're having fitna in the masjid. Right? So which is a sign that what? That there's no barakah with that person. There's no rahmah with that person. Right? So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the same ayat, He says, وَذْكُرُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ, right? Remember that favor of Allah Ta'ala upon you. إِذْ كُنْتُمْ عَدَاءً فَأَلَّفَ بَيْنَ قُلُوبِكُمْ فَأَسْبَحْتُمْ بِنِعْمَتِهِ إِخْوَانًا, right? And so remember that ni'mah, that barakah, that blessing that Allah had gave to you, you became brothers in the deen, right? And remember when you guys were on the brink of the pit of the fire. وَكُنْتُمْ عَلَى شَفَاء hufratin min an-nar. Remember, y'all were on the brink of the fire. Meaning that somebody was on Iman and you were on Kufr at one point, on the brink of the fire. And then you're fighting an animosity towards one another, especially, and I hope that, this permeates amongst our young, because these guys are fighting and killing each other at a young age. And you look at it, we kind of like promoted some as parents. Everything is always about fighting. What's the first thing you teach your children before you teach them how to spell their name? If somebody put their hands on you, you make sure you fight back, right? We ingrain that. The child go to school with that, wearing that joint on his shoulder, right? But when it comes to them how to spell their name, you go to your teacher for that. But these are the principles that we teach them at home, but we don't teach them the Islamic principles. When you see another Muslim, you give salams. Little kids are salam adults, but little kids don't salam each other. They mean mug and grit on each other. What's up with bull? Sound like white slime. I think I know this bull from somewhere, right? Immediately. This is our youth. So we'll teach them how to fight, but we won't teach them how to write, right? So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he continues on in this same ayat. He says, فَأَنْ خَذَاكُمْ مِنْهَا كَذَلِكَ يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ آيَاتِهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَهْتَدُونَ. And so then Allah Ta'ala, he says in closing, he saved you from it, meaning that fire. And thus Allah Ta'ala makes his proofs clear to you so that you'll be guided. So think about this. The same way that you hold animosity and how you don't do fitna, Allah Ta'ala saved you from division, but rather yet you still want to carry that baggage with you into Islam. And here, today, let me see, how much time we got left before my break? I'm gonna stop here today. Inshallah, we'll continue when we get into the first section. That was my introduction that I compilation, to the book, to the text. And so next week we'll get into the first chapter, which the first chapter is entitled The Rights of the Muslim Towards like his brother, right? This isn't a chapter, this is actually like an introduction to the first chapter that comes in. The part I'm gonna read is from the text I've translated, like I said, with At-Tibyaan, the At-Tibyaan, that's what I call it for short. But it's about the rights, the rights of the ikhwan, of the brothers. So inshallah, like I said, this class that I begin, I wanted to make it just a class, to promote suhbah, unity between my family within and of itself and the Jama'ah, but I believe it'll benefit the Muslims in general. So inshallah, for those of you, you got benefits, share this with your friends, your loved ones, your husbands, your wives, and etc. And inshallah, we'll pray for the success of the ummah. But this is one of the first things that we must have is we have to develop mutual cohesiveness. And this is only done by coming together and also emptying out the heart and seeking, empty out the heart of hatred and animosity. And hatred and animosity is usually built and perpetuated up on ignorance, usually. Because our Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodio, Taghadamallahi bi rahmati Amin, he teaches us in Ihya Sunnah wa Ikhmal Bid'ah, right? He teaches us in there, in the Muqaddimah, in the introduction, that it's not permissible to hate the people of La ilaha illallah, even a sinful person, right? So this is the beginning of our blameworthy characteristics. When we're looking at each other within the Jama'ah or within the family, and we have a hatred and animosity towards one another, that's one of the first signs of destruction. And it's impermissible. Why? Because it goes back to what we just spoke about in the beginning, because the Muslim in general has a a general relationship of wilaya with a friendship, a protected and connected friendship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, how is it that you're supposed to love what Allah ta'ala loves and hate what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates? You hate the action that the person practices or promotes. If a person is practicing a particular sin, you hate the sin, but you don't hate the individual, right? In the example that the Shaykh who gave, he quoted Imam Ghazali. He said it's like you have a beautiful wife, but she's disobedient. You love her for her beauty, but you hate her disobedience. So with that, Ikhwan, we have to work harder on spreading love amongst each other. Start by emptying the heart of any rancor, jealousy, envy, and those things, out of the heart. For, the Jamaat and my students, you should always be studying the section on Tasawwuf until those things that the Sheikh he mentions in that section becomes part of your everyday character, where you purify yourself from that, right? It's always a knowledge cure and an action cure. Knowledge cure is when you learn the information. Action cure is when you put it into practice. So with that, inshallah, I'm sorry, spread the salams amongst each other, right? Frequent each other. One way that you always salam each other is if y'all see each other in the masjid. When you walk in the masjid, assalamu alaikum. When you're praying next to each other, assalamu alaikum, right? And we know in the Maliki madhab, it's fadila recommended to give the salams back to the person that's on your side, right? All of these things. Even when you're doing the tashahhud, in there you're giving salams to the believers up on the Prophet sallallahu, and so on and so forth. So these things, they go a long way. Don't cut yourself short, because life is too short. Don't cut yourself short in serving yourself. Serving yourself, cutting yourself away from the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He put right in front of you by giving you family and a jamaat as well. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik, wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Barakallahu fikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Have a good evening, inshallah.